feel like Mark's overly serious tonight. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very serious.
Very serious with his countdown tonight.
No nonsense.
No nonsense. Sorry, Mark. Hi, I'm Carl. Welcome to Horizon Solutions. This is Jake, and tonight we are talking about cameras.
Yes.
We're talking about cameras, camera settings, and that kind of thing. Thank you for coming. If you haven't been here before, this is Horizon. We have been here for 5 years now, and we used to be just down the street, but we've been around for over 40 years. And we work with schools and churches and theaters, all of which are represented here tonight. And we do work with all kinds of different clients of all shapes and sizes, working with technology in all of their different kinds of spaces. And we also stream these events and these seminars online for anybody who wants to check it out. And it's always interesting because some seminars, we have a couple of people watch live and a couple more people watch the next day. And then other seminars, we have a whole bunch of people watch it over the years, and they gain lots of traction. So we, throughout the year, are always trying to decide what are some of the topics that we're going to talk about. And there are some standards like audio mixers and microphones and stage lighting, and we usually talk about some stuff around theatrical lighting and how does it work and how does it fit together and that kind of thing. But we hardly ever talk about video in this context. And I'll be honest about that. Part of the reason for that is that we often feel like we're not as good at it as what we would like to be. And we have also felt like we struggled finding the right person to help us teach this kind of thing. Jake's actually only been here with us at Horizon for about 4 or 5 months, 5 months?
4 months, I think.
4 months,
Yeah.
5 months, something like that. And it's actually really great having Jake as part of our team. We were actually, Logan was just saying this earlier, just like 15 minutes ago, that most of the people at Horizon have a background in audio or in lighting, but less of us have a background in video. So when Jake came here to Horizon and he brought his 10 years-ish experience behind a camera and behind a switcher, that kind of thing, that helped us in a big way. And I think that both Logan and Mark would agree on that. And if you talk to anybody at Horizon, I think Jake's been a great addition to our group here. So when I said to him, we should talk about cameras, and you should come and help us talk about cameras, and we'll do this. And he was like, yeah, no. I stand behind the camera. This is not what I'm doing.
Exclusively behind the scenes.
That's right, exactly. It was like, nope, no. We talked about it. He got a little more comfortable with the idea, and he's standing here, so we're good.
Here I am.
Okay. So we are going to walk through tonight video cameras, and we're going to talk about a number of different things. And I'm hoping that it's going to be helpful. If you've got questions, either you folks or if anybody online has questions, they want to go ahead and post those questions, then they can do that, and we will try to answer those as we go. Mm-hmm. So we'll get started. And we get started with most of these seminars in kind of the same way, and that is starting off with the basics and starting off with foundational type stuff.
Yes.
It doesn't get much more foundational in cameras than starting off with a tripod.
With your tripod. So yeah.
So I got a question for you.
Yes.
Do I always need a tripod?
I would say 99 times out of 100, yes.
Yeah?
You do.
Why?
Because you want to keep your camera stable, and to do that, you need a tripod. You only really want to not use a tripod when you're doing it for artistic reasons, I guess.
Right.
If you're wanting that handheld look or anything like that, or if your camera is needing to move around a lot.
Right.
But otherwise, you want to use a tripod at all times. No matter how stable you think you are holding it, it's still going to look shaky without a tripod.
Right. I think one of the things you and I discussed earlier on was that, if you're learning something tonight about all of the other settings and things we're talking about this evening, then you're probably going to have enough time spending just trying to make sure you've got that stuff right. And if you now start moving around and you start, dealing with different angles and stuff, then you're maybe master those other things first, and then you can think about how you want to deal with other stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so tripod. What do we need to know about these things?
So, first off, you want to determine what style feet you need for your tripod. So you can have your rubber feet, which if you're on a flat, grippy surface, these are good. They're not going to slide around. But if you're wanting to put your tripod outdoors on grass, for instance, most of these style tripods will have spikes underneath your rubber feet that you can just stick in the ground, then it's not going to move around on you. If you have your rubber feet on grass or like a slippery surface, your tripod's just going to slide around. You want to stick it in the ground, and if I can get that back on.
I think it comes back to a lot of things that we talk about, which is that predictability, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And if the tripod is not going to be predictable in how it's operating, then you can end up with issues and things aren't working out.
Yep.
So you're having a tripod malfunction?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Usually this is easier to put that on. There we go.
So then the next piece that we were talking about with tripods is the base itself, or the spreader itself, I guess.
So this piece at the bottom here is called a spreader. There's two styles of spreader your tripod may have. This style, which is called a ground spreader, it's on the ground. That's going to be used for if you're on a flat level surface, and it's just at the bottom, spreads out the feet on the ground. Or you're going to have a style like one of those tripods over there has a mid-level spreader, so it's midway up the tripod is good for if you're situating your tripod on an uneven surface or stairs, like an angle. If to put a ground spreader that way, if one of your feet is up here, it's not really going to work, so you want to use that mid-level spreader.
Right. And there's a third tripod over here that doesn't have a spreader at all.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit it's a different kind of a tripod. It's almost more for photography.
Yes.
Or I suppose it would also, because you're talking about stability with the spreader in a larger tripod, a tripod like that is good if you are probably more just dealing a static shot and less actually movement.
Yeah. If you're just setting up a camera, setting it and locking it off and leaving it, it's never going to move. Yeah, a tripod without a spreader is fine. Something lightweight like that, it's like once it's set up and good, you don't have to touch it. But if you're going to be like operating, moving the tripod head around, you're going to want something more stable with a spreader.
And having something that's a little bit more beefy so that it's actually got some resistance when you're moving, right? So that things aren't falling over.
Yeah, because if I were to try to move that one around, as you can see when I'm even moving this one around, it's kind of moving on me. That one's just going to fall over.
Right. Okay. All right. So continuing with setting it up.
Yeah. So first of all, when you're raising it, most tripods have two stages. The bottom stage there that will raise it up, and I'll just extend all three there. And then your top section, which is
So would
here.
you typically start with the bottom or with the top?
So for me, I always like to start at the bottom, because if I need to adjust it further, it's much easier to do it like from here. I don't have to like bend over and go down and do it that way.
Yep.
If I were to raise this part up all the way first, then my locks are all the way down here. I got to kind of bend it over. It's not, it just is easier if you do it this way.
Okay.
Raise it all the way up first. It's like a lighting stand or a speaker stand with multiple stages. You want to do the bottom first, work your way up to the top.
Right. Okay. All right. So we've got it standing there. What's next?
So a good rule of thumb for tripods is the higher you put it, the wider you want your base. So that's where your spreader comes into play. So if I am raising my tripod up, and I'm making it pretty high, I want to spread out the base a bit. Probably not that much, but just enough so that it's a little wider. It's going to be a little more stable the higher I raise it. Especially if you're using a heavier camera that's going to make your tripod really top heavy, you want your base as wide as possible so that it mitigates that.
Right. Okay, cool. Okay. So I know that when I've sold tripods to people for different projects, then we're typically ordering it as two pieces or as two pieces in a kit. So the tripod itself and then the fluid head. So what makes a good fluid head, or maybe first we should talk about actually setting that up first, and then we can talk about what makes a
Yeah.
good one.
So you want to make sure, obviously, that your tripod is level so that your camera shot is level.
Right.
Two parts to that. You want to make sure that all three of your tripod legs are the same height, first of all. If you have, say, one leg that is lower than the others, let's do that.
Right.
And then you level your tripod head with your leveling bubble that should be on there.
So that's a small leveling bubble
Yeah,
that's
if I
in the
turn
top
this around, you can
there.
probably see that it's right here, leveling bubble. Yeah, so if I level that, so shooting straight on is going to be level now, but since one of my legs is lower than the other two, as soon as I start panning left and right, it may be pretty subtle, but you're going to see that your camera shot is becoming not level, because it's kind of doing this.
Right.
Versus if your legs are the same, it's going to just be like that.
Right.
So you want to make sure all three of your legs are the same height. Then adjust your tripod head to be level, and you'll be good to go.
So this part I know. So if I press the red button,
Mm-hmm.
red for making sure that you're careful.
Yeah.
Oh wait, I have to undo that, right?
Yes.
Okay, then I can pull off the shoe part.
The plate, yes.
The plate, right, the plate, sorry, not the shoe. Okay, so then I can screw that onto the bottom of my camera,
Yes.
right?
One thing to keep in mind when you're putting your plate on the bottom of the plate, it should have an arrow that says lens and an arrow pointing in one direction or the other. You want to obviously make sure that the lens of your camera is that way, because that's the way your plate is going to fit in on your tripod.
And
to
then
be right.
And then when that goes on here, slides
Yep.
back on, it should lock in place, and then I can go ahead and turn this to lock
Yeah.
it from moving, right?
Yeah, so once you hear that like clicking on, if you have that still loose, it'll move back and forth.
Right.
And then you turn that and it'll lock it in.
And so I know about that because many, many years ago, after working way too many hours, I put a camera on a tripod. The camera fell right off the front of the tripod, and it cost a lot of money.
Yes.
And now I make sure.
Yes, you want to make sure that all your locks are tight so that your camera's not gonna fall off. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. All right. So we've got that on there. Now what are we doing?
So you want to set your resistances. All your tripods, with your fluid head at least, will have pan and tilt locks as well as pan and tilt resistance settings. So the pan and tilt resistance is just adding a bit of resistance, making it more difficult to move your tripod head. It kind of helps you smooth out your movements when you're panning and tilting. If I make this really loose, it's going to be very easy to move it around. And then I put some on. I'm using the same, let's put more. I'm using the same input. It's kind of smoothing it out a bit. It's going to help you, if you're a jerky camera operator, to kind of smooth out your movements.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else we need to know about it?
Some tripods have what's called counterbalance. This one's setting is right there. It's a little switch that you can turn on and off. So that comes into play when you're having really heavy cameras that need to be counterbalanced, so that I'll turn it off so you can see, like, so it starts to like drift down or back, whichever way you're going in your tilt. If you put that on, it'll kind of like compensate for that. And the more expensive, higher-end tripods will have adjustable counterbalance, so you can adjust that for the weight of your camera.
Right. And I suspect that it's the kind of thing that once you get used to how that tripod that you're using regularly, how it works and how the balance of it all works, then you can use that to your advantage.
Yes.
How you're moving up and down and all that kind of thing is advantageous.
Yeah, and especially if you're operating live, it is very helpful that if you're shooting a consistent shot that is tilted down or up a lot, you can kind of like let go and it stays there with the counterbalance.
Right.
Versus if your counterbalance is off, it'll just like kind of go like that.
Yeah.
Bounce back.
Cool.
And that wouldn't be good.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
So, next thing is becoming familiar with the camera itself.
Yes. So every manufacturer of camera is different as to where they put all their buttons and how they lay out their menus and how it all works. But every camera of the same specs will have the same things, the same features. It's just where that specific manufacturer has laid out their buttons and their menus. So it is a very good idea to get very familiar with your camera, where all the buttons are, before you're actually doing a shoot, so that you're not frantically trying to find a setting when you need it.
Especially in the kind of shows that we do, where it's obvious, we're often working in the dark, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have a lot of...
You won't necessarily be able to see what you're doing.
One of the things that, again, probably me being naive about cameras in general, is the fact that there are, depending on which camera it is, there are more or less user-defined buttons, right? So that you can jump to specific settings. And some of the settings we're going to be talking about in a couple of minutes, you can jump to those quickly instead of having to dig through the menu in the touchscreen.
Yeah, so if you have like a specific function that isn't a normal function that would have a dedicated button, most camcorders will have assignable buttons, which you can assign that function to, and then just press one button, and it's doing that function for you. You don't have to dig through the menu every time to turn it on and off.
Right. Right. Cool. Okay. Inputs and outputs.
Yeah. So that deciding what camera you're going to get is that will come into play a lot. What kinds of inputs and outputs you need, whether you need audio inputs or what outputs you need, if you need HDMI or SDI.
So a good example would be, do you need a balanced line input into the camera? Do you need a microphone that's a balanced input, or can you just get away with with the unbalanced input that's going into it?
Yeah. So I guess kind of know what you need before, and take that into consideration when you're deciding what camera you're going to be using.
This camera has both HDMI and SDI on it. We've got other cameras that have HDMI on them, and we've made different purchasing decisions at different times based on what we thought was most important. And in a couple of cases, we've bought cameras, or we've sold cameras to people based on the fact that they want a 4K camera. They're expecting to get 4K output out of it. They want to do that, except that the camera at the price point they can afford, that's the word, that they can afford, will do HDMI 4K output, but the SDI is still 1080p. And so it's not necessarily advantageous for them. They're better off in that specific case to buy the 4K version that's just HDMI output, and then a proper HDMI to 12G SDI converter, and then they get what they want. Like, it depends, right? It depends on what it is you're trying to achieve, and knowing that before you get into it is good.
Yeah, and they won't necessarily blatantly advertise that either, so you got to kind of...
Right, because 4K is usually in big letters.
Big
somewhere.
4K,
yeah.
But, like, is that just on the record? Is that the output as well?
Right, exactly.
No one knows to tell you that.
Yeah, right, and knowing kind of how it's going to record and what kind of media and all that kind of thing, it's worthwhile making sure that you know what your intention is of this camera. Some of our clients, they want to only ever use a camera for recording directly to an SD card. And then we have other clients that their expectation is they will never record anything to an SD card, and they're always going to be capturing directly from that into a video switcher or into an encoding device or something of that sort. So knowing what your plan is a good idea.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Anything else we need to know about that before we move on to the...
I don't think so. I think that pretty much covers it.
All right. So that leads us into having to talk a little bit about resolution. We've already kind of said a couple things about 4K and 1080, but
Yes.
we do need to talk about this a little bit more.
Yes. So most camcorders you can buy today are going to be capable of 4K. That's just the way the industry is going, I think. And whether you need 4K or not, that is another question. Me personally, I've never really needed 4K before. The only time like I could see using it for like a live stream or anything like that is if you need to like crop your image. If you wanted to zoom in your camera more, if you're shooting 4K, you can zoom it in more to 1080 and get more zoom out of your camera.
Does that make sense? Are you guys following what we're talking about there? So the idea of shooting in a full K image and then being able to crop within that 4K image to get a 1080p shot that actually looks half decent. And
Yeah.
we sell some conferencing systems that's natively how it works. So it's taking a 4K image of a room, and it moves while people are moving around, but it's essentially moving around a 1080p or 1080
Yeah, the camera's
resolution.
fixed. It's just moving
Yeah.
cropping the image, moving around. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like, and also with 4K files are going to be much larger than 1080p files, if that's a concern for you. Also, shooting in 4K, if you want to shoot in a specific file format, 4K is not supported on all the file formats usually.
Right.
So that's another thing to consider. And also the frame rate, 4K is not going to be supported on all the frame rates camera's capable of.
Right.
So I think you just got to, before purchasing a camera especially, know your specs, what exactly it's capable of.
Right.
As far as the 4K settings are concerned.
Right. I think it's like a lot of things where right now, pretty much every camera has some sort of 4K option.
Yeah.
Whether it's 4K 30, 4K 60, whatever that might be. But many of our clients are purchasing 4K because they feel like they want to have 4K, but their switching equipment or their capture devices that they're using to capture into their computer are actually all maxing out at 1080.
Yeah.
So at some point in time, you have to kind of decide which way you want to go. And so, and if you're talking about projection, so many of the systems that we're installing today, again, people are asking, can we do 4K projection to go along with the whole system? But then once they see the cost of 4K projectors, that all of a sudden everything kind of crashes down, and we're going back to 1080 really strong, which is fine. And you have to consider, how far away are you from the image and everything else, and are you actually seeing a 4K image at some point?
Yeah, and I think 1080 is still good enough for most applications. Like, I don't think I've watched any 4K content that I can remember, because I don't have that equipment to show 4K.
Right.
So I don't know how prevalent it is for certain applications. I'm sure it is more, but
yeah. It's interesting because I know that even Sportsnet is often streaming in 720, and people don't even realize it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. Any questions so far? Are we doing okay? All right. There we go. We're good. We're
yeah. I think we're moving on to settings.
So I'll move this, and you can talk about the first setting, which is auto.
Auto, yes. So all of your cameras are going to have an auto function of some sort, which is just setting all the settings for you. You don't have to think about it. It'll just create a good-looking image for you automatically.
Right. Is it a good idea, though?
If you know nothing at all about cameras, I would say yes.
Right.
But if you do know a bit about cameras and you've gone over what your camera is capable of, I would say it is not a good idea.
We were talking about this a little bit about how, in theory today, AI is going to be fantastic at all of these different things. except that the auto, or if you want to call it the AI, in your camera is really not seeing where you came from or where you're going to. What's happening with the rest of what you're doing, right? And so as such, it can't prepare for the next thing that's going to happen. Probably the biggest mistake that I see over and over and over again, especially when in our church client projects as well as some of our theater client projects, and it certainly does happen in schools as well, where you take a camera and you've got it at the back of the room and it's shooting the stage, right? The main person on stage, whether it's somebody doing a presentation or what have you, and the focus is on autofocus. And then somebody's head appears in the bottom of the, and then all of a sudden, it's like when they get partway through, then all of a sudden the focus goes, whoa, I should be paying attention to that. And then they're out and it's already messed up, right? Whereas if we didn't use the auto, if we actually did set it up as manual, then we're going to actually have it locked on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Auto doesn't know what your intentions are or what you want to get out of your shot. Right. It's just going to see what it sees and make it look good for what it thinks looks good.
Right.
Now, if you're trying to focus on one thing only, and like somebody walks in front, it's going to just think, oh, I should focus on that.
Right.
When it shouldn't. Or if the lights flicker off for a second, it'll go try to go really bright because it thinks, oh, I should do that, but no.
And that never happens in theater, right? The lighting never changes in theater.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, it's that constant sort of a thing.
So yeah, you don't want to use auto if you can help it.
If you can avoid it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So moving right along, getting into the first thing that everybody should be thinking about with their camera is focus, right? So we've asked Gemini for some explanations because sometimes it's easier to get a definition from AI that it actually, these days it actually works out pretty nicely. It gives us a pretty concise answer. So in videography, focus refers to the sharpness or clarity of an image, a key element used by directors and cinematographers to guide the viewers' attention and convey emotions or story elements. I don't know if we're going to be talking specifically about emotions and story elements tonight.
Not, no.
Probably not. But we are going to talk about focus and how that works.
Yeah. So I think focus is pretty self-explanatory. You're either in focus or out of focus.
Yeah, and we're gonna do a bunch of stuff tonight where we're gonna jump between some cameras. So I think we're gonna. There we go. Yep.
So obviously that shot is very out of focus. Does not look good, and I bring it sharply into focus. Now it looks fine. So you can kind of get artistic with your shots using focus a bit by rack focusing, like I just did. Kind of bringing your shot out of focus and then sharply into focus. Kind of looks good, especially during musical productions for live streams.
So just for the record, nobody has ever hired me as a model. So I'm sorry for tonight that there's a lot of close-ups on Carl. That's just going to be the way that things go tonight.
But yeah, it's you're going to want your shot in focus for the most part. I would think, just because people need to see what's happening.
Right.
And then you have a few focus assists you can use. We have what's called focus peaking. Logan, if you want to change over to the Sony.
You know what? Before we do that, can I ask you one thing?
Yes.
How did you adjust the focus on this camera?
So I'm in manual focus right now, and that puts the focus to this ring on the lens that is closest to the lens itself. That is usually where your focus ring is going to be on most camcorders and interchangeable lenses. Will be the ring closest to the end of the lens.
Right. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So if we switch over to Sony, you can see there's now this red stuff happening around Carl. That is your focus peaking assist. So you can change the color of that to a few different colors. I just have it on red because that is the most obvious one for these lighting conditions. So if I crank this out of focus all my red goes away. As soon as things start coming into focus, that red, that is the point where things are in focus. So
Cool.
wherever I see red, it's in focus.
Any questions? Yes.
So I noticed when you zoomed out on the other camera, the focus, you still maintain focus. Is that like a feature?
So the question is when you zoom, when we zoomed out on the first Canon camera,
Yes.
then the focus stayed in focus as you're zooming in and out. So
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah, on a camcorder style lens,
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
a camcorder style lens
Okay, sorry. Yes.
versus a stills photography lens,
Right.
for a DSLR. Yes, that is a feature that if you zoom in as far as you can go on something, I won't go right on Carl's face.
So can we go back to, yeah, that's
the
perfect, thank you.
Yeah. So if I get a good sharp focus on that, there we go. And then every point in that range from there backwards will be in focus. That's called back focus. So I zoom in all the way to the end of my focal length, I get a good sharp focus, and then every point from there back will now be in focus. So that helps if, especially during live productions, you can kind of zoom in, set your focus, and then wherever you move around from there, you'll still be in focus.
Right.
Very
Does that make sense?
helpful.
Cool.
Yeah, and that's only really happening on like built-in lenses or like very expensive broadcast interchangeable lenses. Your regular lens you have on a DSLR will not have that.
Got it. Okay. All right.
All right.
Anything else about focus?
I think that's it.
All right.
Yeah.
So that takes us to talking a little bit about exposure.
Yes.
So exposure, we're saying here that it is a balancing act. Can we jump to the slide there for a second? Thank you. Okay, great. So in videography, aperture or iris, shutter speed, and ISO form the exposure triangle. They work together to control brightness and overall look of your video. So this is the first time where we realize that in video, and to an extent in photography, there are a lot of different terms that mean similar things or the same thing, which can certainly make things more complicated than they really should be. Yes. So we already have aperture and iris, which for the most part are the same thing.
Yeah, like aperture is going to be used more so in like photography and like high-end cinema, and then iris more for your camcorder and broadcast.
Okay, and then we're talking shutter speed, and then we're immediately talking about ISO, and we're going to talk a little bit later about how that is actually also considered gain in a lot of situations. So all of that creates the exposure triangle, and they work together to control the brightness and the overall look of your video. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 different things and how they work together. All right?
Yep.
Is that it? Or moving on.
Moving on.
Moving on. Okay. So that takes us to shutter.
Yes.
So shutter speed refers to the duration each frame is exposed to light, typically expressed as a fraction of a second, which significantly impacts motion blur and overall video appearance. So you'll notice that that's 1/60 or 1/120th, and let's just jump to this for a second. So if you have a shutter speed of 1, then there's more light coming in. And if you have a shutter speed of, in this case, is that 1/1000?
Yeah, 1/1000th of a second.
Okay, then we have a lot less light. You'll notice that tonight we are using a lot of graphics that are pretty good. We found some pretty good graphics out there, and we've tried to tag all of them with the logos from where we have found those, because there's some really great stuff that we've found. So if you go back and take a look at the live stream, then you'll be able to take a closer look at some of these graphics, and they're great. So how does this work, Jake?
So I think before we do a little demo on it, we should talk about shutter speed and frame rate, which is our next slide.
There it is.
So your frame rate and your shutter speed kind of coexist. You want to set your frame rate first because that's what is going to affect your shutter speed.
And your frame rate is that 1080p 30, 1080p 60,
Yeah.
1080p 120. It's the how you're recording the video that you're capturing,
Yeah,
right?
how many frames of video every second you're capturing.
Right.
So to achieve a normal looking video, like what would the human eye would mimic, you want to either have a frame rate of 30 or 60. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that you want to set your shutter speed at that frame rate times 2. So double what your frame rate is. And that's going to just achieve a nice natural looking video. So at frame rate of 30, you're going to do shutter speed of 60 and frame rate of 60, 120.
Does that make sense? Cool.
So you can change your shutter speed to make certain effects happen beyond what is suggested for your frame rate, which we can do a demo of
So I'm
the effect of that.
going to bounce back to this slide for a second so that we can kind of reference it a little bit as we're working through this. But so I have an XLR cable that's going to be our prop for tonight. And you have 2 different cameras there. And I guess maybe we'll pull those up in the split screen so we can see both of them.
So I'm going to set the left one down to 15, and I'll set our one on the right up to, let's do 1,000.
So you're just referring to it as 15 and 1,000,
Yes.
just because you already know you're talking about shutter, so that's what,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's just every value will be 1 over a different number. So
Okay.
I'm just, yeah, that's what I.
So what's the first thing that we notice?
The difference in the light. You can see the lines of the light.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing lines travel through the light, right? So this is an issue that is more or less prevalent. This is a part I can talk about more because it's a bit more lighting. This is an issue that is definitely less prevalent than it was when LED lighting first started to hit the scene. When LED lights first started to come onto stage and into video applications, we saw this constantly, and it didn't matter really what speed we were running at. It was constantly there, flashing, and it had a lot to do with the refresh rate of the LEDs themselves. So a couple of things have happened there. One is that the LED manufacturers got wise and they adjusted the speed of their basically the flash of that LED, because LEDs do flash constantly. Some manufacturers have actually gone to the point of giving you the ability to adjust that. So the fixtures that are our front lights here, we could go up and adjust that so that there is less of that sort of a flash. Some fixtures we can, some fixtures we can't. It depends on what the fixture is. So yes, we're getting into the range here in this video where you can start to see that banding, and as that's flickering through there. And then I guess the other thing is that we are seeing a little bit of a difference in the amount of how bright the image is too, right?
Yeah, so what I've done for this demo, I just put the camcorders on shutter priority. So I'm only changing the shutter. The camera is compensating with the other values to make the image the same exposure.
So we had this conversation about to show this whether or not I would dance on stage or swing a baseball bat, and what we decided to do was just swing an XLR cable. So you can see with the different, I could do this for a while. You could see with the different shutter speed how much different that looks on camera. And you can imagine that if this was, some sort of real sport, or something like that, how that would affect what's going on.
Yeah, so for your sports broadcasts where they need like super slow-mo for replays, they would shoot with a very high frame rate and a very high shutter speed to achieve that. So they can slow it down really and still have that clear, like, no motion blur.
Right. And they're also going to be very conscious of what the lighting is and how the lighting's all working, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and those sensors on those cameras are going to be much more sensitive because they need a lot more light to achieve the same look with that higher frame rate and shutter speed.
Right. Does that make sense? Cool. So, if you're setting up a camera to be used in an application of school presentations, theater, church, that kind of thing, what are you typically shooting for when you're looking for shutter? And I have a sneaky suspicion I know what you're going to say.
I'm going to set it up to be as natural as possible.
Right.
Because if you're setting it up with kind of either of these, the slower shutter speed or the really fast shutter speed, it's not going to look natural. People are going to be like, what's wrong with the camera? Something's wrong.
Right.
So these are more effects for if you need super slow motion, you would use that fast shutter speed. Or if you're kind of exposing, I don't know if you've seen like some music videos with that effect that people get like, I don't know, very, like they're moving slowly, but they're kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but.
Yeah, kind of morphing.
Yeah, morphing sort of thing. That's a really slow shutter speed.
Right.
So it's more used artistically. Like 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to use that natural looking 30 or 60 shutter speed.
Right, and so if we take a look at that slide again, it comes back to that reference of really, for the most part, your shutter speed should be matching whatever the frame rate is that you've set, that you've chosen when you start, when you chose what your entire system is going to be running out, or however you're recording. Make sense? Cool. Okay.
All right.
So we have shutter speed. That takes us to iris, or aperture. So in videography, the iris refers to the adjustable opening, or aperture, in a camera lens that controls the amount of light entering the camera, similar to the human eye's iris. So it controls the amount of light entering into the camera. This graphic is kind of handy. So iris open, iris closed. We can see that iris actually falls in between the lenses, and which is interesting because if you want to talk about stage lighting, we could talk about where we put irises in stage lights. Very similar. And we have another handy graphic. This one from a website that wouldn't tell us who they were, which was weird. So we didn't attribute this graphic to them because we couldn't figure out who they actually were. But this gives you a good indication as to the broad range from a faster shutter speed to a slower shutter speed. So on the left-hand side would be more light with a faster shutter speed, and on the right-hand side we have a slower shutter speed with less light. How are you doing there, Jake?
I'm good.
Yeah? So I think we're going to show this. Now, you mentioned something to me that I thought was really interesting when we were first talking about this, and something I didn't realize, is that this chart goes from 2.8 all the way up to 22, but most of the camcorders that we work with these days actually don't have quite that range, right?
Yeah, so these camcorders that we're using today, the Canon XF400, has aperture range of f2.8 to f11, and that only depends on certain focal lengths. So if I'm zooming in more, I'm going to have less of an aperture range at the low end, because more I zoom in, the less the aperture can open up.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right. Yep.
So I have it zoomed, these cameras zoomed in. If we show the split, yeah, pretty close. So my aperture range is actually only 4 to 11 for this demo.
Right.
But this will still show the effect we're going for. So as you can see, over Carl's left shoulder, we have that other Canon camcorder in the back. On the left, you can see it's a bit more blurrier than the one on the right. So a lower aperture, or a wider aperture, smaller number, is going to provide a shallower depth of field. So it's going to separate your subject from the background more than a higher aperture, higher number, or a more closed iris. As you see on the right, the camera and tripod is a bit more in focus, so it has a deeper depth of field.
So I guess the question to an extent is, what are you looking for? Like, which one do you like better? What's the look that you like better? What are you trying to achieve? I don't know, what are some of the examples why you might want to use one or the other?
If you want a more like cinematic look, definitely a lower aperture to have that separation from the background. A nice photography term is the bokeh look. You get like on lights in the background, you get that nice bokeh effect,
right?
With the low aperture. But if you're gonna want everything in your frame more in focus, you're gonna want a higher aperture, if that's what you're going for.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the one on my left, that one is interesting because everything behind me is soft, including the backdrop, where on the other one it's a very distinct line. So it's actually very distracting to me anyway when I look at that. That where the other one it's just nice and soft and it just kind of disappears back there. But I suppose if you were doing something where you had a number of people on stage, like let's say you had a large choir or something, then you may want to consider, well, is that really a good idea?
Yeah, if like you have people and like multiple, I guess, points on the stage closer or farther away from the camera, yeah, you might want a higher aperture so everyone's in focus and not just the person in the front.
Right. So if you're doing something like you're taking video of a bunch of kids on stage for school or for a theater or something like that, then you don't want the kids at the back to be all blurry and the kids at the front to be, because Grandma and Grandpa will not be happy.
They will not be happy.
No. Cool. Okay. Is this making sense? Anything else we need to? No? We're good? All right. Then that takes us on to ISO or gain.
Yes.
So ISO is the numeric value that sets the camera sensor's sensitivity to light. And that is, that's a film thing. Like I remember when I was a kid, my mom would always buy ISO 200 film because it was the safe one. It was simple. You buy that one and you could use it for almost anything, sort of a thing, right? And I'm not sure if she knew anything about photography. Whereas gain today, if we look at that, that is kind of the digital equivalent to ISO. So the digital amplification of a camera's sensor signal expressed in dB values, because we're actually gaining that up and bringing up that signal. So we have a couple of different ways that we were going to try to show this, right? Oh, I guess actually we should show this graphic. So if we look at the top there, so the ISO 100 through to 6400, which the idea being that that's going to become much more grainy, but at a time when we need more light. And now we put the numbers at the bottom there from 0 to 30, but it's not, we intentionally didn't put steps that matched the ISO because it depends to an extent on a few different things. You can look online on charts and different people will come up with different ways to try to say, oh, well, ISO 200 is always this. And it didn't seem to jive. There was a few different ways people are saying that. So we chose to say, as that gain goes higher, you're going to get more green. That's going to be the rule of thumb. Speaking of which, Mark, I think we're building up to a lighting cue for you. Okay. I don't know. Do we want that right now?
I think we're good. To
Okay.
do
So
that right now.
which lighting cue are we starting with?
Our darkness lighting cue.
Our darkness lighting cue.
Yes.
Okay. So plunging into darkness. This
So
is
if we throw up that split again.
like this is the
So the camera on the left, I have a gain of 3 dB, versus the camera on the right, I have a gain of 30 dB. Otherwise, they are the same settings. So if you're shooting in low light, this can be a useful tool just to have an exposure that you can actually see something. But it will add a lot of noise and not look good and will affect other things. As you can see, the background on the left is still the color that we want, but on the right, it's completely washed out. Because that gain has exposed Carl well, but there's still light on the backdrop, so it's going to blow that out.
This reminds me of the one where you can actually see me. Reminds me of videos of when they're, the live reporters or whatever are at the live concert or something, where they've overdriven things so that you can see those people, but the lighting is such that it's definitely not for video. So they're just trying to achieve something that they can get.
Yeah.
So they can go to broadcast.
And that is really the only time I would recommend using gain, if you really need to, because it does introduce all that noise and graininess, and it doesn't look the best. So I would only really use gain if you need to.
Right.
You want to try to get a proper exposure with your lighting versus trying to digitally amplify it.
Right. So that's not an easy thing, because in theater applications, we're typically lighting for the room. And this actually, as a theatrical look, the way the room looks like right now, you could argue that this is a more theatrical look, and it's good. But we still need to be able to capture it for live streams. So it's that balance, right?
Yeah, it's always a balance with all of this.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? No? That's it? Okay. All right. Is there anything else that you want to talk about with gain or ISO?
I'll just say that each ISO number so each stop of ISO is going to be double the last one.
Okay, so if we go back to that for a sec.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So your ISO 200 is going to be double your 100, and 400 is going to be 200. It's pretty easy with ISO because the next number is just double. But with gain, it'll depend on your camcorder how many stops of gain you have. Like these Canons have single stops of gain, so it'll just go up by 1, incrementally, versus the Sony camcorder we have here goes up by 3 dB steps.
Right. Right.
So
Okay.
that's something to keep in mind.
So again, something to think about if you're looking at purchasing a camera and making some decisions that way.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. All right. I think we can go back to regular lighting in here. Okay. All right. So we are now, actually, I think we're going to talk about just kind of a follow-up with the exposure triangle.
Yeah, so this is a nice graphic. It shows all your different exposure settings and that they're all connected. So each exposure setting you change, say you're going to change ISO to something different, that will also affect your aperture and shutter speed. You're going to want to change one of those to compensate for your ISO change to achieve the same level of exposure. So if I change the ISO to be higher, I'm making the image brighter, but I maybe want to keep my depth of field, so I'm going to have to change that aperture. Yeah, it's a kind of like if you're changing one, you gotta change something on the other two. Shutter speed, like I said, you want to keep that pretty consistent. You're not going to really touch that if you're trying to achieve that natural look. So more so, you're going to be changing your aperture and ISO to achieve your desired look.
Right. So lock in your shutter speed first.
Yeah.
Then do we go to the ISO next, or do we go to our aperture next? How do you typically work?
I typically do, lock my shutter speed in, and then I usually do my aperture because I'm going to want a certain depth of field, and then ISO last.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Did we have an example of this? Were we going to...
I don't think so, actually.
No?
No.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this takes us to another lighting look, actually. So ND filter. Do you guys know what an ND filter is? Yeah? No? Yes? No. So the ND filter, or neutral density filter, reduces the amount of light entering the camera lens equally across all wavelengths, preventing overexposure and allowing for longer exposure or smaller apertures without affecting color rendition. So I was first introduced to neutral density from a lighting perspective. So, and this is going back to some film and television applications where you want to make something, remember old conventional lighting fixtures where if you dim the light, then it gets more amber. And as you dim the light, then that amber shift happens and everything becomes warmer. So the light started off as maybe 3,000, 4,000 Kelvin, but as you dimmed the light, then the light would get warmer and it wouldn't be the color temperature you wanted. So in film applications and in some other applications, they would use neutral density to block the light to get the level that they wanted without dimming it, to take 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 watt light and dim the output of it so that it's dimming the output, but it's not changing the shift of color. Make sense? Cool. So we're kind of wanting to achieve the same sort of an effect on the opposite side, this time on the camera side, right?
Yeah, so this is more so like if you're outdoors, you have too much light and you want to kind of cut the amount of light that's coming in, but you don't want to change your colors or your aperture or anything like that. You just want less light.
The image here is kind of an interesting one because it shows a filter on one half of the camera and no filter on the other half, and you can see that there's a lot more going on there. The camera's capturing a lot more. So
yes. We have another lighting cue.
We have another lighting cue, that's right. These cameras actually have a couple of ND filters built into them, right?
Yeah, so they have, I believe, 3 ND filters built in, a quarter, an eighth, and a 16th. So that's just the amount of light it's cutting. So quarter ND will cut a quarter of light.
Cool. So I think we've got our very bright lighting look because we don't have a sunny day in here. So instead, we're using moving lights. So this is about as bright as we can get in here without pulling out more lights, which I guess we could have, but this is bright enough.
Yeah. If we throw up the split again, we can see I've put up on the left, I've put 30 dB gain on just to accentuate this, that it's way too bright. And then our one on the right is 0 dB. Looks pretty good.
This might be thrown out of proportion a little bit, right? For illustration purposes.
Purposes, yes. So if I start throwing some ND filters on, that's a quarter, and then an eighth, and a 16th. So now a 16th, that's looking pretty good. You were just allowing less light in, and it looks pretty similar to the other one. All I've done is added ND filters.
I can't see a thing.
So yeah, it's a good tool for if you have way too much light, you can cut it, typically outdoors, and then maintain all your other settings that you want.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Do all camcorders have ND filters?
Not all of them. Actually, most camcorders will, yes.
Until you get into smaller
yeah,
handy cam
yeah,
sort of
really
things.
small ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, most this size will definitely have them, and anything bigger than that.
How about, not that we use a lot of PTZ cameras outside, but how about PTZ cameras? Do many of those have them? Or I guess it depends on what it is.
Yeah, it depends too, and I think, I don't know about PTZs, but for like DSLR cameras, you can get screw-on ND filters for the end of the lens.
Right.
I think maybe PTZs have that as
That,
well.
that would make sense, yeah.
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 But I don't think they have them built in.
Right. Okay. Okay. Cool. Any questions? I can't see you anyway. Just okay. All right. I think Mark. Thank you. That's great. Okay.
All right.
All right. So that's ND filters. So the next subject is one that lots of people want to talk about, and sometimes people understand it more or less than other times. It depends on the situation. So white balance. In videography, white balance is a camera setting that ensures white objects appear white. Establishing a baseline for color accuracy by compensating for the varying color temperatures of different light sources. Nobody understood, I shouldn't say nobody. The average person, remember before COVID, and nobody really knew what PPE was, or they didn't care what PPE was, and then everybody, that was like, my mother-in-law was talking about PPE, and all that kind of thing, right? And then when the advent of compact fluorescence and then LEDs, then we all got talking about, what's the color temperature of that bulb? What's the Kelvin of that bulb? And still, I've stood in Home Depot and I've listened to people talk about it, and I think they don't really understand what they're talking about. But we are all needing to pay more attention to that on that end, which I think makes it a little bit easier to explain how white balance works in the camera world. This is an interesting graphic that Canon had produced for explaining some of their cameras. And they're showing a couple of auto white balance strips there, and then they start showing some of the some of the preset white balances that they have on their cameras with some interesting graphics. This slide here shows kind of a slightly different variation on the same thing, and it's really actually kind of helpful. This is from Digital Camera's website, and it's kind of cool because it gives you an idea as to, through the different color temperature, right from 2K up to 9K, it gives us a pretty good range so that you can see kind of what this looks like. Theatrical lighting typically lands in that 3,000, 3,500 sort of a range, where obviously, outside we're into that 8,000, 9,000 sort of a range. So it's obviously significantly different. And so if you are working to try to capture video on your theater stage, or whether that's in your school or church or theater, and when I say in your church, I mean if you've got theatrical type lighting, then that's one thing. But equally, it's going to be very different if you are in a church application, which we've done work in church applications where there's lots of windows. And so those windows are going to change the color of the room significantly. So how are you capturing that? And what it all comes back down to, if we go back to that, we go back to here, it ensures that white objects appear white. You could argue that any of those things are white there. But if they're not side by side, then we've got different arguments as to whether or not you would think one is white or one is not white. So, how do we deal with white balance in our cameras so that we can ensure that white is white, Jake?
So your camera is going to have multiple different things in your white balance setting. So if we could switch back to our left camera here. So right now I'm on manual. If I go in there, I'm at 5600. These lights we have in here are outputting a pretty blue light, so I'm gonna white balance it more blue. If I were to bring that down to a more theatrical lighting, let's say 3500 level, you'll see it becomes very blue. So if I had like a tungsten fixture, for example, that would look blue or look white. But since I have a blue light, we want more like 5600, 6K.
Right. Now, you've done this before.
Yes.
So it's a little bit easier for you to kind of look at it and say, well, this is approximately what I'm looking for, and this is approximately the color that we want Carl's hair to look. So while you're setting that, but that's obviously not everybody's got the same experience that you do.
Yeah, so there's two ways you can kind of do it. So we have our auto white balance, obviously. It didn't really change much between when I changed it back to manual. So it, I think, agrees with me that that is white. That's what it should be. But if you want to really set it, you can set it with a white piece of paper using this. To do this, you want to fill your frame with white only, nothing else. And then make sure your model is holding it so that your...
You just called me a model. That's funny. Thank you.
Holding it so that there's no shadows on it. It's pointed directly at your light source. That's going to get you the best white balance. And then you're going to want... I'm going to actually... I think we said this before, so I'm going to do 2, which is slightly different. And then I'm going to hit set white balance. There we go. And it's going to think about it and then give me a number, 7410. That's what it thinks white is. So if I zoom back out, that looks pretty good.
So it's interesting. We were having a conversation earlier on this afternoon with one of the other guys from the office, and we were talking about how in a space like this, and if you're working on a stage, then it's not too bad to be able to use a white piece of paper or white sheet or white whatever, because the lights are all pointed at this. But if you're in a room where there isn't traditional lighting, or traditional stage lights, or there's lots of sunlight, or there's lots of different angles, then how you hold that, how you use whatever that is that's going to become your white, how you use that is going to have an impact on things. And so you want to be careful about how you're setting that up. Okay?
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
So you have multiple cameras because you have a camera from this side, you've got a camera here, you've got a camera here, and you're shooting with multiple cameras. When you do that, how do you set the white balance for each of those? Do you set the white balance for one and then mimic that on the other ones, or how do you work through that?
So what I would typically do is, like we just did, white piece of paper, every camera zooms in on it, gets their white balance. Or if that's not possible, you don't have enough camera operators to do all that, or a person to hold up your white piece of paper, you can do one of them and like see what that camera says, what it comes out with, and then just manually set all the other cameras to that.
So, okay, so a couple of things have come to mind.
Yeah.
So let's say we do have 3 cameras here. Yeah. We've got this camera, and then the camera over here.
Yeah.
So if I hold up that piece of paper, for one thing, the light is hitting from different angles. Yeah. So there is the possibility that each camera could get a slightly different white balance reading, correct?
Yes.
And how do I go with that? Or do I say, no, I have to standardize to all of them so that then if I'm taking, either A, I'm switching between them, or B, I'm going to try to edit each of those 3 cameras. What's more important? What's your approach?
I would say get them like as similar looking possible, just like setting the temperature and then go in after and adjust each one. Yeah, like you said, it will be slightly different, especially if you have multiple types of cameras. They're not all going to be exactly the same if you set them to the same temperature.
Right. So in this case, so we have three. Ignoring those ones for the moment. This is a Canon camera. Those two are data video cameras that actually, if you dig into the specs, they actually have Sony camera
Sensors.
blocks in them.
Yeah.
Yeah, sensors in them. So they are definitely going to be different. They couldn't be a whole lot more different. So would you, in a case like this, would you pick which camera is kind of your money camera, your most important camera, and then your other ones you're going to set off of that?
Yeah, definitely whichever one is going to be like, if you're doing a live stream on air most.
Right.
Yeah, the most important one, set that one to look the best, and then match your other ones to that.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yes.
How, say for example, you're shooting outside, how would you deal with, like if you have cameras using just one camera, how do you deal with like the change in natural sunlight over time?
Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, I'll just repeat it for the live stream. So the question is if you are shooting outside, or to an extent, if you're doing the same thing in theater, right? If lighting is changing, if the clouds are coming across, that kind of thing, and the light changes, which can, if we looked at that chart again, then it shows that, shady might be one color of white, and bright sunshine could be another color of white, sort of thing. So how do you deal with that? And I think that's actually kind of a bit of a segue into the auto white balance piece, right?
Yes. So
Thank you for that.
yeah, that was a good question. Yeah, auto white balance would be one way to do it for sure. It actually does a pretty good job most of the time, just especially if the change is gradual. If it's a sudden change, maybe not so much, because it'll be a sudden white balance change.
Right.
But you could also do it by setting two different white balances. Most camcorders will have like two set white balances. So we have two here, 1 and 2, that you can like just on the fly change to. So
Right.
if you're outdoors, for example, when there's sunny and then some clouds come in, you could change to your other one. That also applies and is helpful for if you're doing an indoor shoot and you're moving your camera between two rooms, say, if you're recording something. You can set your white balances for each room beforehand. That'll make your setup in each room a little quicker.
Right.
You can just change to the white balance you already got.
This is probably, I should have mentioned this earlier on, but the images that you're seeing on on the screen here and on the live stream, that's a capture of the camera. We've intentionally turned on all of those on-screen displays. That, of course, is not something that has to be there. We've turned it on for the sake of today. Yeah. So does that help? Does that help to answer that? Yeah. So kind of that is an area where it's helpful to use an auto setting, but that also is a part where that auto white balance is set within the manual settings. So the whole camera isn't on auto, just the white balance is on auto.
Yeah, and if it's like, sometimes I do like, just one setting is on auto. Like autofocus is one that I'll have on sometimes because I know it's pretty good. It's not good, but everything else is manual.
Right.
Because I don't want any of that to change, just focus.
Right.
Or auto white balance if you're outdoors is another good example of that.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. I think we already talked about this. So that takes us to presets. And, we've made a bunch of settings, but we want to make sure that those settings are there when we come back to the camera, especially if there are some basic things that you come back to regularly, like why do I dig into the menus to reset my shutter speed if I'm always recording at the same frame rate, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so your camcorder style camera will have something called custom picture or camera profile or picture profile, something to that effect.
Right.
They all do the same thing, which basically just saves those picture settings that you can recall them later. And you can also go in real deep and change all kinds of things that you probably don't want to change. I can change that. I don't know if it's doing anything, but this is more like for the video engineer people, that they can really change every little detail of a camera's picture and save it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you can save those and you can recall them if you need to.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So that takes us to, we've kind of got the camera set up. We've got things and we understand the terminology. So how do we actually start using this thing? And I have seen some really, really great looking shots, meaning the color's good and everything else, but the framing is awful sometimes. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so your framing, you're going to want to frame your shot so it looks good. You want, the most common mistake I would say is too much headroom. So if we go to our camera shot here, this is a pretty good framed shot. I only have a little bit of headroom above his head and just basically a waist up shot. This is called a medium shot. And then we have our wide shot, which would be all of them. And in the medium. And then we have our close up, which would be all of his face, and then our extreme close up. So depending on what you're doing, you want to maintain, once you've selected your shot, you want to maintain that framing. If they're sitting and talking to someone, for example, there's another frame you would do. You want to give them a little bit of looking room. If we frame them straight on and they're talking to somebody over there, it kind of looks a little weird. We want to give them a little looking room. That just looks better. Whether he's facing directly off screen or just talking to someone like over the shoulder style, like say I'm over here and he's talking to me, you want that looking room still.
Right.
The only time you're going to really frame him straight on is if he's looking dead center.
And straight at the camera.
And straight
sort
at the
of look.
camera, yeah.
Right.
Now, if you have a moving subject, you still want to maintain that framing wherever they go at all times. If I'm trying to keep a medium shot, I'm going to be zooming and maintaining that shot. If I were to just stay here and he's moving around, moving closer to me, and I'm not zooming with him, it's creating, now it's a close-up versus where he's going back. That's right. So you've always got to be maintaining that framing at all times, no matter where your subject is going.
Now, one of the tools that Jake is using to do this is a remote on the handle.
Yeah.
On the handle of the tripod, so that he can adjust the zoom at the same time as he's moving back and forth. Not rocket science, unfortunately, for some reason, always more expensive than they should be. I don't know why.
Well, you need them, I guess.
But yeah, I guess that's it. They know you need it. So
yeah.
Yeah. This movement piece is one of the real reasons why it's important to make sure that you've got a good fluid head on your tripod.
Yes.
And that you've got that set properly and you can release it and tighten it down when you need to. So I don't know if you noticed it, but as soon as I stopped and as soon as Jake stopped following me, his immediate instinctive reaction was to reach up and lock the tripod down so it didn't move. And that's just, I'm sure that just a
yeah.
muscle memory thing, right?
Yeah, I just don't even think about it. That's
right.
Yeah.
It's just how it happens.
Yeah.
Cool. Any questions? Yes.
Is this one of those cases
Yeah, like I would say definitely. Like especially if your camcorder has like a face tracking and it's the only face in your frame, yeah, it does pretty good job, and it's a very handy feature. Um, if you get into more expensive cameras, you can have another arm with a focus controller on it as well, and that's kind of how the broadcast industry does it. Not really applicable for what we're doing with these cameras, but yeah, it's I always like manual just because that's what I like, complete control of it, but autofocus does do a pretty good job.
Okay. So in the last year, 2 years, probably mostly in the last year, we're seeing a lot more auto tracking cameras in the PTZ side of things. And, especially through COVID, things became, we saw more and less expensive auto tracking within the boardroom and within the meeting space. But we're seeing more and more of it in PTZ cameras. So the camera that I'm looking at right now and the camera over there, they both have auto tracking built into them. And even in the software updates, the firmware updates that we've seen in the last couple of months for those cameras, the framing is the piece that's gotten better. The tracking itself, locking onto a person and their movements has been good. But over time, as they've updated that firmware, that's been like some pretty significant steps where you see a new firmware update and the tracking, the amount of headroom that the camera automatically provides, the fact that as you're moving back and forth, it actually, you turn and the camera does actually start to provide a lead, right? It's actually pretty smart the way that they're doing that. So that is a function that we're seeing more and more of, which is great. That's cool. Yeah, and we're not really talking about that so much tonight, but pretty much everything that we've discussed tonight goes and works with PTZ cameras as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on. So that takes us to, we've got an idea as to how these things work. How do we choose the right camera? What are some things, what are some suggestions, some tips, Jake, as to what would lead us into to picking the right camera?
So, yeah, picking your right camera, it all really depends on what you're trying to do with it, and also where you're putting it, and what type of shot you need.
Right.
In a perfect world, you would pick the camera that looks best and everything would look great, but realistically, you're going to pick the camera that's within your budget and that will provide the shot you need at the spot you need.
Right.
So it's kind of a trade-off. Like if you need to mount your camera up in a ceiling or something, or like under the balcony in a church, you're probably going to do a PTZ because that's the only real option.
Right.
But if you can, you would probably want a camcorder or something with a higher quality lens that's going to provide a better picture.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing how these things continue to evolve. And what we can find in smaller and less expensive cameras is pretty great, but they do have their limitations. You can only go so far. So tonight, we actually don't have the PTZ cameras set up for showing on this screen, but they're definitely they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the stream tonight. But we have 3 different types of cameras here. So I guess we can kind of jump through those a little bit and look at how they differ and get an idea.
I'm just going to set them all up to look the same as far as framing. And then we can cycle through them.
Okay.
I'm going to turn.
And I think we have what's live here on the TV in here right now is the Canon DSLR camera, right?
Yeah, the one without any information on it. Yeah, the DSLR.
Okay.
So that's that one, and then we switch to the Canon camcorder. And then the Sony.
And these all have similar settings in them right now.
So yeah, they are right now the exact same settings. An aperture of 4, shutter speed of 60 with an gain of 3 dB, or ISO 200 in the case of the DSLR.
Right. So if we kind of switch between those 1, 2, 3 a couple of times, then you can see how they are similar, but definitely different.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like even, my sweater, the gray in my sweater has slightly different tones in it just in itself. Now, a certain amount of that is going to be that the Sony camera to the DSLR, there's 3.5 feet between those lenses, and so the lighting is going to be a little bit different. But it's still, it's a different chip that's in these,
different sensor, different lenses. It's all going to affect how it looks. So if you're doing a multi-camera shoot, if possible, you want the same manufacturer and type of camera, if you can, just so
Right.
they match.
Right. We see lots of DSLRs on corporate projects where people are shooting video for talking head sorts of situations, somebody just sitting here talking, that kind of thing. But we see less of them when there's a lot of movement. Does that sound right?
Yeah, your DSLR is very good for just like a locked off shot, no movement, because you can kind of set it and it's good. And your camcorder is definitely going to be way better for if you're doing zooms and moving around, because it's built for that. Versus
Right.
the DSLR is built for stills photography.
And if you're in a situation where you want to use SDI output, then you're not, I don't think I've ever seen a DSLR with SDI output. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about when I say SDI, then you can ask us later and we can talk about SDI as a video transport. Or you can watch the Resource Stage seminar that we did on that from like 1.5 years ago or something like that. And there's a whole video explaining how that works. So, all right, is that helpful to kind of a different explanation on those? So that takes us to tips for operating your camera.
I'm going to come join you up here.
Are you even going to get a seat?
I'm going to get a seat.
Oh, wow. How do you like
Sit
that?
down. I've been standing a long time.
All right, well. So for starters, and I think actually some of these tips are good because it's not just about standing behind the camera, but it is, doing what Logan's doing tonight and switching and that kind of thing. So the first one is on comm or on headsets.
Yeah, so when you're on headset, you want to kind of be respectful of everyone and not basically only talk as much as you need to, unless you're the director directing everyone. You want to keep headset chatter to a minimum. It can just be distracting to everyone and cause problems. You want to just let the director direct and not get in the way.
A couple of weeks ago, we hosted a Resource Stage event at one of the churches in town, and we did this mixing seminar. And you were there.
I was there.
And one of the first things we said was, pay attention. And it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's paying attention, being on if you're on comm or not on comm, paying attention so that you know what's going on, and always being aware of what's coming up next.
Yep.
Tally lights. Oh, yep. Sorry, we've got a question over here.
The communication devices that you guys use,
Yep.
are they specific to like behind the scenes so like they don't interfere with camera transmission or anything like that?
That's a good question. So the question is, do the headsets that we use for communication for events and shows and that sort of thing, are they specific so that they don't interact or don't create an issue with other technology in the room or so on and so forth? What's interesting is that the number one brand in Canada for our work, meaning for live events and for film and television and studios around Canada, would be Clearcom. And Clearcom is now owned by a company called HME. And HME, I guarantee you see HME headsets all the time, because almost every Tim Hortons is using HME at their drive-through. And so it's the same company with the same sort of technology that's being used in the drive-through. It's being used for college football. It's being used for all kinds of different things, and for video and for theater as well. Now, depending on which model and depending on which pieces you're using, they use different frequency ranges. So if you're in a different frequency range, then that can have an impact on other devices in your space. So whether that's wireless microphones, whether that is a Wi-Fi or what have you, but that can all be determined when you're putting together the system. For the most part, today, most of those systems are digital wireless, which means very narrow frequency bands and a lot less susceptible to interference from other devices or becoming an interference for other devices. Does that help? I guess the short answer is no, it's not a problem.
Yeah,
I mean, for the most part, it's not an issue.
Yeah, and a lot of intercom systems are going to be wired too, so you will not have any interference, especially in like my background of broadcast. It's all wired.
Yeah, and it's often wired because it's cheaper. It is super reliable.
Yeah.
And the reality is that the camera operators, we talked about this already, the camera operators are often fixed in a position. They're not running around all over the place. And so having a wireless comm system is not necessarily advantageous if you're going to be at specific positions. Yes, sir?
I guess this is more specific. Wired as in, like, what do you wired into?
What are you wired into? So a wired comm system is a closed system of its own. So it has a power supply, and then there's individual wires that run from the power supply out to a belt pack that then goes to a headset, or to a base station to a headset. And that how that kind of lays out, there's a number of different ways that you can do it, but usually it's a base station, and then things are starred off of that, or there's also the ability to daisy chain from one belt pack to another. But it's a good question, and it's something we don't talk about comm that often these days. We talk about wireless comm more than we do wired comm, but it is something that we rent all the time, and we can definitely show you what that looks like even before you leave tonight. Okay, cool. Okay.
Go to a new frequency so that it's no longer being interfered with. So, and then you also coordinate with all the other departments so that way none of the frequency ranges are interfering with each other. So that's like a really coordinated effort. And I know that some people can scan theaters as well to make sure that any outside interferences are known about, but then you still have sometimes there's just nothing you can do.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Chelsea. So if you're watching the live stream, what she was just saying is that in a lot of our theater applications, and we do the same thing in some of the larger school and church applications, we can scan the system and scan the wireless space so that we can see what other wireless frequencies are an issue, and whether that's wireless microphones or wireless DMX or other wireless things in the area. And then we can pick and choose wireless channels that are available for wireless comm so that all of those things fit together. But, and she also correctly stated that many wireless comm systems have the ability to be frequency agile. So they can actually bounce between different frequencies to make sure that they're on a clear space. Thank you for that. That's a good point. Okay, cool. All right, tally lights. So tally lights is it's something that it's really, really great, and lots of people don't use them.
Yeah, so your tally lights, if you've ever seen on top of a camera a red or green light, that is your tally light. Oh, we have an example.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so this red light will light up when it receives a signal from the switcher saying that this camera is on program, just a visual aid for the operator saying that they're the camera that's live right now. And if this one on the backside would light up green for if they're on preview. So how a director would switch, they'd put the camera on preview, the green light would light up, and then they take it on program, red light lights up. That's kind of how tally lights work, and they're just a visual aid for the operator, just so that they know where they are in what's going on.
So the idea that you're live, you know that you're live, you know, don't fall asleep.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And it's also great for the people on stage
Yes.
because then they have an idea as to which camera they're looking at and what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You have a question? Okay.
Oh, yes. The idea of always live. This is a good one.
Yeah, so when you're operating, a good thing to do is always act as if you're on air, even if you're not. Because in a high-pressure live situation, things can happen, and the director will have to take your camera even if you're not ready. So if you're always, act like you're always on, always ready to go, it's kind of just a safety for everyone that if the director has to take your camera, won't be a mistake. It'll still look okay.
I think that feeds right into the next point here about maintaining your framing no matter
Yes.
what's going on.
So a lot of inexperienced camera operators will they'll get their shot, the director will go to them, and then they're kind of just staying there, or they'll drift off and just stay somewhere else that's not take like a usable shot, and then the next time and just wait for direction. So if you're always maintaining your framing, acting as if you're always live, it's just helpful for everyone that there'll be less mistakes.
I guess the other thing is that if you're a new camera operator, then if you're always on, you're always paying attention, you're always trying to keep your framing, then you might be live for a quarter of the program, but the other 3/4 you're learning and you're becoming better at your craft as you're doing it. You're constantly being better at it. It would be easy for somebody to say, that's really nice, Jake, but I use PTZ cameras, so this doesn't apply. I don't think that's true. I think it absolutely applies.
Yeah, and you always want to be thinking of not just as a director, but a camera operator as well, as what's coming next, getting your next shot as soon as you're off air from your last shot, knowing, like anticipating if you don't know what's coming next, so that the director will have to direct you less, and this show will just run smoother.
And so the translation to a PTZ application would be, maybe I am transitioning off to a wide shot that's a lock shot, or maybe I'm transitioning into a shot that, in our church application, maybe we're on a piano for somebody singing. But what's happening with the other camera? If you have 2, 3, 4 PTZ cameras, what's happening with those other cameras so that they're ready if something needs to happen, we need to transition off of there. If we need to move off to the next thing. Same thing, I'm thinking about some of the school applications that we've been involved with in the past where, you've got that shot on the principal, and the principal's talking, but we need to be able to quickly move back to a full shot of what's going on the stage. Then being prepared that, that second camera is still over here where the kid with the guitar was, but the kid with the guitar is long gone. But if we still have that camera on the kid with the guitar who doesn't exist, instead of having it prepped for that next piece, it's not going to flow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You always want to be, like thinking at least one, probably 2 shots ahead where you're going, setting that up, and telling your camera operators to prepare for that.
You're right. Right. Pay attention.
Pay attention.
So this one I think is oh, sorry, we got another question here.
Yes.
Sorry. So if you do have like a full frame from like head to toe shot in like a TED Talk or a church setting, and the speaker wanders a lot. So I know we talked about maintaining framing as like if he's in the center, do you always want him in the center? Does he have some room around the edges?
So the question is if you've got a full shot of somebody and they're moving, then how do you maintain that framing so that we're covering them properly? How should we be doing that? And maybe that's something that we can show on the camera in a second. Do
Yep.
you want to do that?
Sure.
Let's you know what? Let's finish off this last thing on this slide and then we'll jump right into that.
Okay. Sounds
Okay.
good.
So is that okay? Okay, cool. So we're talking about maintaining framing. We're talking about always being on live, but this idea of finding your rhythm. And I think this is well, go ahead. I'm not gonna you go ahead and explain it.
This is like, I don't know if everyone does this, but when I direct, I kind of like match the rhythm in my like how I'm directing in like what I'm shooting. So for example, like I direct the live stream at a local church and North Park Community Church. For the music segments, I'm directing. If it's a fast song, I'm directing more, I'm talking more. I'm kind of matching the rhythm of the music versus a slow song. I'm kind of like talking less, talking slower, matching that rhythm. And then kind of my camera operators kind of match that as well. They're moving slower for a slower song, moving faster for a faster song. So just having the rhythm of what you're shooting is going to make everything look better. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean I think that makes a lot of sense. What about in something like that TED Talk sort of an idea or church message or something like that? How do you find the rhythm in that?
That is more like there's not going to be as much directing going on because you're basically just following a person on stage. So I'm not really directing so much. I'm just more watching it, making sure that my camera operator is doing a good job and that they're paying attention.
Right.
And yeah, it's kind of difficult too because some of those are like a little more dry than shoot it like directing music, but
Sure.
you still gotta just pay attention and make sure that it still looks good because a lot of times their mind starts to wander and you gotta still be on it.
And I think you're right that there is less of a rhythm, but I think there's also you can be following where the tone changes or the topic changes, and when the topic changes, then we can maybe be looking at a slightly like a switch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. My guess is you probably do a certain amount of that intuitively, or second nature.
I guess, yeah.
So let's take a look at framing.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to, I guess we're going to use camera number 1 there. Is that
Yes,
the
our
left camera?
Our left camera here.
And I'll get rid of this for a second. So if I start off in the middle of the stage, and we're talking full, you're talking
Full.
mostly kind of full head to
Head to
toe
toe.
shot, right? A few things to move. So the idea that as I'm moving from one side to the other, which of course our lighting is not really set for this in here tonight, but that's okay. As I'm moving back and forth, then the question being, how are you kind of lining that up? Are you lining up in such a way so that we're leading towards where the person's going, or are we trying to keep them in the center of the shot? And I think there's a balance there, right?
Yeah, so if they're moving back and forth a lot, if they're kind of facing forward, like facing towards the camera, I would keep them centered. And if they start talking off the stage one way or the other, I would kind of give them a little looking room as they're walking that way. And then when they stop centered, and if they start moving again, I
So-
would kind of lead them.
Almost like a kind of a reset
Yeah.
to center.
And then you also, if you're doing this, you want to keep in mind where the edge of, like, where you don't want to see is going to be. So say I wanted to stop here. There's something over here I don't want to see. I'll just kind of let Carl go into there, and then I'm going to stop, even if I'm not maintaining center framing, because I don't want to see this stuff over here. And then, because he's not going to go over there. And then I'm just going to follow him around and say I don't want to see the TV on this side. I'm going to stop right here. Maybe not even that. Yeah, if he's going over there, I'm not going to show the TV. I'm just going to let him wander around and keep him centered when he comes in the center. Yeah.
Certain amount of that is keeping the framing, and a certain amount of that is keeping the illusion of the studio or
Yeah.
the stage space that you're working within, right?
Exactly.
Does that help? Great. Well, Jake, is there anything else that we want to cover for tonight?
I think we covered quite a bit.
We did cover quite a
Yeah.
bit. Does anybody have any questions, any general questions that we have not talked about tonight that you'd like to look at? Yes, sir.
Will we be able to see how it runs, like how you guys are switching everything?
Yeah, absolutely. We can go over and we can take a look at that in just a minute. Yep. Any other questions? No? Okay, cool. Well, thank you, sir.
No problem.
That wasn't so bad. You did great.
Yeah, I guess it was all right.
It was okay. Thank you very much for coming tonight and for joining us. We have coming up. There's a number of different things. We have coming up in June. We are hosting a resource stage conference at the Grand Theater. That is coming up I want to say the third Saturday in June. I believe it's the third Saturday in June. And we're taking over the entire building. We have a number of different things going on with seminars throughout the day. We've got manufacturers coming, bringing gear in, and they'll have tabletop trade show type stuff going on. We are working on setting up some demonstration things around the building. So we're looking at trying to have a small band and having a bunch of equipment set up with that. There's a variety of different things. There's more information going to be coming about that. So that's the first thing. Second thing, we are, for our 20th anniversary of doing resource stage seminars, we are giving away a pair of Genelec monitors. So if we have your name here from tonight, then you will be entered into the draw for winning a pair of Genelecs, and we're doing that through the entire year. So anybody who comes to a resource stage seminar or event and you register, or if you're watching online and you grab the QR code by the end of the night, then you will be able to enter into the draw to win that set of Genelecs, and they're pretty sweet. I've heard them. Have you heard them?
I have not.
They're
But
great.
I've heard they're good.
They're great. They're really good. And we have throughout the year, we are doing specials on microphones and headphones and different things. This month, it is a specific dynamic hypercardioid microphone that we're selling at 20% off of regular price. So if you want to get in on that, that's a good deal. And there's a variety of different things going on. And if there's something that we can help you out with, if you've got questions, then feel free to give us a call and we can chat about it. Whether it's things like how does comm work, or how does video switching work, or how does PTZ cameras work, or if you want to pick Jake's brain about framing, then we can definitely do that. I think that's it. I think that covers everything. Are we good?
We're good.
Cool. Thank you very much for coming tonight, and thanks for watching on the live stream. We hope to see you at the next Resource Stage event. Thanks.